The morning sun was just starting to peek over the hills when Officer Blake Rodriguez got the call. It was 6:30 a.m. on a Tuesday, and most people were still sleeping or getting ready for work. But not Blake. He had been on the morning shift for 3 years now, and he knew this was usually the quietest time of his day. Unit 47, we have a report of suspicious activity at Willowbrook Country Club on Maple Street, came the voice through his radio. Blake picked up the radio and responded, Unit 47 here. What kind of suspicious activity? Caller reports seeing an older black male walking around the golf course area. Says he doesn't belong there and looks like he might be up to no good. Possible trespassing situation? Blake sighed quietly. These kinds of calls were becoming more common lately. People seemed to be calling the police for everything these days. But it was his job to check it out, so he turned his patrol car toward the golf club. Willowbrook Country Club was one of the nicest places in town. The kind of place where business deals got made over 18 holes and where the parking lot was full of expensive cars. Blake had driven past it many times but never actually been inside. It wasn't exactly the kind of place a regular police officer could afford to visit. As he pulled into the parking lot, Blake noticed how quiet everything was. The morning dew was still on the grass and the whole place had that peaceful early morning feeling. He parked near the clubhouse and got out of his car, looking around for any sign of trouble. That's when he saw him. There was an elderly man, probably in his 70s, standing near what looked like the first hole of the golf course. He was wearing a nice polo shirt, perfectly pressed khaki pants, and golf shoes that looked like they cost more than Blake made in a week. The man had gray hair that was neatly trimmed, and he moved with the slow, careful movements of someone who had been playing golf for many years. Blake watched from a distance for a moment. The man was pulling a golf bag from what looked like a golf cart, organizing his clubs with the kind of attention to detail that only comes from years of practice. Everything about the scene looked completely normal for a golf course except, for one thing, the man was alone and it was very early in the morning. Blake started walking toward the man, his hand resting casually on his belt. He had learned over the years to approach these situations carefully. You never knew what you might be walking into. "Excuse me, sir," Blake called out when he was about 20 feet away. The elderly man looked up from his golf bag with a surprised expression. He had kind eyes and a face that showed he had lived a long life full of experiences. When he saw Blake's uniform, his expression changed slightly, becoming more cautious but still polite. "Good morning, officer," the man said in a voice that was deep and steady. "Beautiful morning for golf, isn't it?" Blake stopped about 10 feet away from the man. Something about the situation felt off to him, though he couldn't put his finger on exactly what it was. Maybe it was the early hour, or maybe it was just the way the caller had sounded so certain that something was wrong. "I got a call about someone who might be trespassing here," Blake said, trying to keep his voice friendly but official. "Mind if I ask what you're doing here so early?" The elderly man straightened up slightly, and Blake could see a flash of something in his eyes. It might have been disappointment or maybe just tiredness. The man had probably dealt with situations like this before. "I'm here to play golf, officer," the man replied calmly. "I usually come early in the morning because it's quieter and I can take my time. The course is beautiful at this time of day." Blake nodded, but he wasn't entirely convinced. The caller had seemed pretty sure that something wasn't right, and Blake had learned to trust his instincts over the years. Something about the whole situation just didn't feel normal to him. "Are you a member here?" Blake asked, taking a step closer. "Yes, I am," the man answered without hesitation. "Mind if I see some identification? Maybe a membership card?" The elderly man's shoulders seemed to drop just a little bit, as if he had been hoping this moment wouldn't come but knew it probably would. He nodded slowly and reached toward his golf bag. "It's right here in my bag," he said. "Just let me get my wallet." As the man reached into a side pocket of his golf bag, Blake tensed up slightly. His training had taught him to be careful when people reached for things, especially when he couldn't see their hands clearly. It was probably nothing, but you could never be too careful. "Just move slowly, please," Blake said, his voice becoming a bit more firm. The elderly man froze for a moment, then looked at Blake with an expression that was hard to read. It was a mixture of understanding and sadness, as if he knew exactly why Blake was being so cautious and didn't like it, but wasn't surprised by it either. "Of course, officer," the man said quietly. "I'll move very slowly." Blake watched carefully as the man slowly pulled out a leather wallet that looked like it had been well used over many years. The man opened it and began looking through it, his movements deliberate and calm. While he waited, Blake looked around the golf course again. Everything looked perfectly normal. The grass was perfectly maintained, the flags were hanging limply in the still morning air, and birds were starting to chirp in the trees that lined the fairways. It really was a beautiful place, Blake had to admit. "Here we go," the elderly man said, pulling out what looked like a membership card and handing it to Blake. Blake took the card and looked at it. It was definitely a membership card for Willowbrook Country Club, and it had the man's photo on it. The name on the card read Robert Washington, and the card appeared to be current. But something still didn't feel right to Blake. Maybe it was the way the caller had sounded so certain, or maybe it was just his own experience telling him that something was off. He had seen fake IDs before, and he had learned not to take everything at face value. "This looks good," Blake said, handing the card back. "But I'm still going to need to verify this with the club management. Do you mind waiting here while I make a few calls?" Robert Washington took his membership card back and put it carefully back in his wallet. He looked at Blake for a long moment, and there was something in his expression that made Blake feel slightly uncomfortable, though he couldn't say exactly why. "Officer," Robert said quietly, "I've been playing golf at this course for many years. I come here almost every Tuesday morning at this same time. I'm not causing any trouble, and I'm not trespassing. I'm just an old man who wants to play a quiet round of golf before the day gets too busy." Blake felt a small twinge of something, maybe guilt, maybe doubt, but pushed it aside. He had a job to do, and he was going to do it properly. The caller had been concerned enough to call the police, and that meant Blake needed to take the situation seriously. "I understand, sir," Blake said, "but I still need to verify everything. It's just procedure. I'm sure we'll get this sorted out quickly." Robert Washington nodded slowly, then walked over to a nearby bench and sat down. He looked tired, but not just physically tired. It was the kind of tiredness that comes from dealing with the same situation over and over again throughout your life. Blake pulled out his radio and stepped a few feet away to make his calls. As he did, he noticed that a few other cars were starting to pull into the parking lot. It looked like other golfers were arriving for their morning rounds. The day was just getting started, but Blake had a feeling it was going to be more complicated than he had expected. Officer Rodriguez walked back toward Robert Washington, who was still sitting quietly on the bench. The old man had his hands folded in his lap and was looking out at the golf course with a peaceful expression, as if he was trying to ignore what was happening around him. "Mr. Washington," Blake said, trying to keep his voice professional but friendly. "I called the clubhouse, but nobody's answering yet. It's still pretty early. Do you have any other way to prove you're supposed to be here?" Robert looked up at him with tired eyes. "Officer, I've already shown you my membership card. What more proof do you need?" Blake shifted uncomfortably. He could hear the frustration in the old man's voice, but he also remembered his training. Never assume anything, always verify. The caller had sounded so sure that something was wrong. "Well, sir, the thing is, we get calls about people who don't belong in places like this. Sometimes people make fake cards or find ways to get onto private property. I'm just trying to make sure everything is legitimate." Robert Washington stood up slowly from the bench. Blake could see that his knees were stiff, probably from years of age and maybe old injuries. The old man walked over to his golf bag and started organizing his clubs again, his movements careful and deliberate. "You know, officer," Robert said without looking up from his clubs, "I've been playing golf for over 50 years. I started when I was just a teenager, working as a caddy at a course across town. Back then, I wasn't allowed to play on the course. I could carry other people's bags, but I couldn't play myself." Blake listened, feeling increasingly uncomfortable. He noticed that a few more cars had pulled into the parking lot and some people were getting out and looking in their direction. "That's interesting, sir," Blake said, "but I still need to verify your membership. Maybe we could call someone you know who can vouch for you." Robert stopped organizing his clubs and looked directly at Blake. There was something in his expression that made Blake feel like he was being studied. measured somehow. "Officer, can I ask you something?" Robert said quietly. "Sure." "If I was a white man of the same age, wearing the same clothes, with the same membership card, would you still be asking me all these questions?" Blake felt his face get hot. "Sir, this has nothing to do with race. I'm just doing my job. Someone called in a complaint and I have to check it out." "I understand you're doing your job," Robert replied, "but I'm curious about something." "What exactly did the person who called tell you? What made them think I was suspicious?" Blake hesitated. He remembered the call, but now that he thought about it, the caller hadn't really given any specific reasons. Just that an old black man was walking around the golf course and didn't belong there. "They said you looked out of place," Blake said. "Finally, out of place how?" Blake didn't have a good answer for that. Looking at Robert Washington now in his perfect golf attire with his expensive clubs, he couldn't think of anything that would make him look out of place at a country club except for one thing. More people were arriving now. Blake could see at least 3 groups of golfers walking toward the clubhouse, and some of them were slowing down to watch what was happening. A few had their phones out, and Blake realized they might be recording. "Look, Mr. Washington," Blake said, lowering his voice, "I just need to get this sorted out. Can we try calling the clubhouse again, or maybe you know someone who works here?" "I could call someone," Robert said, "but I don't think I should have to. I've shown you my valid membership card. I'm dressed appropriately. I'm not causing any trouble. I'm just trying to play golf." Blake was starting to feel trapped. Part of him knew that Robert Washington was probably exactly who he said he was, but another part of him kept thinking about the phone call, about his training, about what would happen if he just let this go and something bad happened later. "Sir, I appreciate your cooperation, but I'm going to have to ask you to wait until we can get this verified. It shouldn't take long." Robert's shoulders sagged slightly. "How long do you think this will take, officer?" "I don't know. Maybe an hour or two." "An hour or two?" Robert's voice rose slightly for the first time. "You want me to sit here for 2 hours because someone called and said I looked suspicious?" The people who had been watching from a distance were getting closer now. Blake could hear them whispering to each other, and he caught fragments of their conversations. "That's Mr. Washington," one woman was saying to her friend. "What's going on over there?" "I don't know, but that police officer has been questioning him for a while now." Blake felt his anxiety rising. More people meant more attention, and more attention meant this situation could get out of hand quickly. One of the golfers, a middle-aged man in expensive-looking clothes, walked over to them. "Excuse me, officer," the man said. "Is there some kind of problem here?" "Just routine verification, sir," Blake replied, trying to sound professional. "Nothing to worry about." The man looked at Robert Washington with a confused expression. "Robert, what's going on? Are you okay?" Blake's heart sank. Here was someone who clearly knew Robert, which meant Robert probably was exactly who he said he was. But now Blake felt like he was in too deep to just walk away. "I'm fine, Charles," Robert said to the other man. "The officer here is just making sure I'm allowed to be on the golf course." Charles looked at Blake with an expression that was somewhere between confusion and anger. "Officer, Mr. Washington has been a member here for years. He plays here all the time. What's this about?" "Sir, I appreciate your input," Blake said, "but I still need to verify everything through official channels." More people were gathering now. Blake counted at least 8 or 9 people standing around, and more were coming. Some were openly recording with their phones, and Blake could hear people talking about posting on social media. "This is ridiculous," someone said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Why is he being harassed?" another person asked. Robert Washington remained calm through all of this, but Blake could see the embarrassment in his face. The old man was trying to maintain his dignity, but being questioned like this in front of other club members was clearly humiliating for him. "Folks, please step back," Blake said to the growing crowd. "This is official police business." "What kind of police business?" Charles asked. "Robert hasn't done anything wrong." Blake pulled out his radio again, this time calling for backup. The situation was getting out of control, and he needed help managing the crowd. As he made the call, he could hear more people arriving and the voices getting louder. "Unit 47 requesting backup at Willowbrook Country Club," he said into his radio. "I have a crowd situation developing." When he finished the call, he looked back at Robert Washington, who was still standing quietly by his golf bag. The old man looked tired and sad, but not angry. There was something about his composure that made Blake feel even more uncomfortable about the whole situation. "Mr. Washington," Blake said, "I'm going to have to ask you to remain here until backup arrives and we can get this sorted out." Robert nodded slowly. "I understand, officer. I'll wait." But Blake could see that the crowd was getting more restless, and he was starting to wonder if he had made a terrible mistake. Within 10 minutes, the quiet morning at Willowbrook Country Club had turned into something completely different. What started as a simple conversation between Officer Rodriguez and Robert Washington was now drawing attention from everyone arriving for their morning golf rounds. Blake looked around nervously as more cars pulled into the parking lot. It was now almost 7:30, and the early morning golfers were arriving in steady streams. Word was spreading quickly among the club members, and Blake could see people pointing in their direction and pulling out their phones. "Officer," Charles said, stepping closer to Blake, "I think there's been a serious misunderstanding here. Robert Washington is not just a member of this club. He's been coming here for years. Everyone knows him." Blake wiped sweat from his forehead. The morning was getting warmer, but that wasn't the only reason he was sweating. "Sir, I appreciate that, but I still need to follow proper procedures. I've called for backup, and we'll get this sorted out soon." An older woman in a bright pink golf outfit walked over to the group. She looked concerned and kept glancing between Robert and the officer. "Robert, honey, what's happening here?" she asked. "Are you all right?" Robert gave her a small, tired smile. "I'm fine, Dorothy. Just a little misunderstanding." Dorothy looked at Blake with the kind of expression that reminded him of his grandmother when she was disappointed in him. "Officer, I don't understand what's going on here. Mr. Washington is one of the most respected members of this club. Why are you questioning him like this?" "Ma'am, someone called in a complaint about suspicious activity," Blake explained, though his voice was losing some of its earlier confidence. "I'm just doing my job." "Suspicious activity?" Dorothy's voice got louder. "What's suspicious about an old man getting ready to play golf?" More people were gathering now, and Blake could hear their conversations getting more heated. Someone in the back of the crowd shouted, "This is wrong," and others were nodding in agreement. A younger man with an expensive golf bag walked up to Robert. "Mr. Washington, I'm so sorry this is happening to you. This is completely unfair." Robert patted the young man on the shoulder. "It's okay, Tommy. These things happen sometimes." Blake noticed that everyone seemed to know Robert Washington. They weren't just defending a stranger. They were defending someone they clearly cared about and respected. This made Blake feel even more uncomfortable about the situation, but he felt like he was in too deep to back down now. His radio crackled, and he heard the dispatcher's voice. "Unit 47, backup is en route. ETA 5 minutes. The crowd heard the ANR radio call, and their reactions were immediate and not happy. "Backup?" Charles said loudly. "You called for backup because an elderly man wants to play golf?" "This is insane," someone else called out. Blake could see people in the crowd recording everything with their phones. He knew that videos of this incident would probably be online within hours, and that thought made his stomach turn. He had seen what happened to police officers who ended up in viral videos, and it was never good. "Folks, please step back and let me handle this," Blake said, but his voice sounded less authoritative than it had earlier. Robert Washington, who had been quiet during most of the exchanges, finally spoke up. "Officer Rodriguez," he said, reading Blake's name tag. "May I make a suggestion?" Blake looked at him, surprised that the old man was still being so polite after everything that had happened. "What's that, sir?" "Why don't you call the club manager? She should be here by now, and she can verify my membership immediately. That way we can resolve this without needing backup or causing more of a scene." It was a reasonable suggestion, and Blake wondered why he hadn't thought of it earlier. Maybe it was because he had been so focused on following procedures that he had forgotten about common-sense solutions. "I tried calling earlier, but no one answered," Blake said. "The manager's office has a direct line," Dorothy chimed in. "I can give you the number." Blake hesitated. Part of him wanted to just wait for backup and let someone else handle the situation. But another part of him was starting to realize that he might have made a huge mistake. And the longer this went on, the worse it was going to get. "Okay," he said finally. "What's the number?" Dorothy gave him the number and Blake dialed it on his phone. As he waited for someone to answer, he could hear the crowd behind him getting more agitated. "I can't believe this is happening," someone was saying. "Poor Robert. He doesn't deserve this. Someone should call the news stations." That last comment made Blake's heart race. The idea of news crews showing up was the last thing he wanted right now. The phone rang several times before someone finally answered. "Willowbrook Country Club Management Office, this is Kelly speaking. This is Officer Rodriguez with the police department. I'm here at your golf course investigating a complaint and I need to verify the membership status of someone named Robert Washington." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Robert Washington? Is he okay? What's wrong?" "He's fine, ma'am. I just need to verify that he's a legitimate member of your club." Another pause, longer this time. "Officer, I'm not sure I understand." "Of course Mr. Washington is a member. He's been a member for many years. Is there some kind of problem?" Blake felt his stomach drop. "No problem, ma'am, just routine verification." "Well, I can absolutely confirm that Robert Washington is a member in good standing. Is there anything else you need?" Blake looked at Robert Washington, who was watching him, with an expression that wasn't angry or smug but just sad. The old man had known all along that this call would confirm his membership, but he had waited patiently while Blake went through the motions. "No, ma'am, that's all I needed. Thank you." Blake hung up the phone and looked around at the crowd of people who were all watching him expectantly. He could hear sirens in the distance. His backup was almost here, but now he realized he didn't need backup. He just needed to figure out how to get out of this situation with some dignity intact. "Robert," Washington stepped forward. "Officer, I hope that helped clear things up." Blake nodded, feeling more embarrassed than he had ever felt in his life. "Yes, sir. The club manager confirmed your membership." "So I'm free to go play golf now?" Robert asked quietly. Blake wanted to say yes and just walk away. But he could see the backup cars pulling into the parking lot. 2 patrol cars with their lights flashing were heading their way, and Blake knew that the situation was about to get even more complicated. The crowd saw the police cars too, and their reactions were immediate and loud. "Now there are more cops?" someone shouted. "This is ridiculous. All this for one old man trying to play golf." Robert Washington looked at the approaching police cars and then back at Blake. "Officer, I think maybe we should try to calm everyone down before your colleagues get here. This doesn't need to get any bigger than it already has." Blake was amazed that even after everything that had happened, Robert Washington was still trying to help him avoid making the situation worse. It was a level of grace and kindness that Blake wasn't sure he would have been able to show if their positions were reversed. But it was too late to keep the situation small. The backup officers were getting out of their cars, and the crowd was getting more upset by the minute. The 2 backup patrol cars pulled up with their lights still flashing, and Officers Johnson and Williams got out. Blake felt a mix of relief and dread as he watched his colleagues approach. He was glad to have help, but he was also starting to realize that this situation might not be what he had thought it was. "What's the situation here, Rodriguez?" Officer Johnson asked as he walked up to the crowd. Blake pulled Johnson aside, away from the group of increasingly agitated golf club members. "Got a call about suspicious activity, elderly black male, possible trespassing, but I just confirmed with club management that he is actually a member." Johnson looked confused. "So what's the problem then?" "Well, the thing is," Blake started, but he was interrupted by the sound of a car door slamming. A woman in a business suit was walking quickly toward them from the parking lot. She looked upset, and she was moving with the kind of purpose that suggested she was not happy about whatever was happening. "What is going on here?" the woman called out as she approached the group. Dorothy, the older woman in pink, turned toward the newcomer with obvious relief. "Kelly, thank goodness you're here. These officers have been questioning Robert for almost an hour now." Kelly looked at the 3 police officers and then at Robert Washington, who was still standing quietly by his golf bag. Her expression went from confused too angry, very quickly. "Officers, I'm Kelly Patterson, the general manager of this club," she said in a voice that was professional but clearly irritated. "Can someone please explain to me why you're harassing one of our most valued members?" Blake stepped forward. "Ma'am, we received a complaint about suspicious activity, and we were just verifying membership status." "Suspicious activity?" Kelly's voice got louder. "What exactly was suspicious about Mr. Washington preparing for his regular Tuesday morning golf round?" The crowd of club members had grown even larger, and Blake could see that many of them were recording everything on their phones. The situation was becoming more public by the minute, and Blake was starting to panic internally. "Ma'am," someone called in a complaint, Officer Johnson said, trying to help his colleague. "We have to respond to all calls." Kelly looked at Robert Washington with an expression of concern and embarrassment. "Robert, I am so sorry about this. This is completely unacceptable." Robert gave her a small smile. "It's not your fault, Kelly. These things happen." Kelly turned back to the officers, and her expression was no longer just irritated. She was furious. No, these things should not happen, especially not to Robert Washington. Blake felt a chill run down his spine. There was something about the way Kelly said Robert's name that suggested there was more to this story than just a simple membership verification. "Ma'am," Blake said carefully, "I've already confirmed with your office that Mr. Washington is a member. We're just wrapping things up here." Kelly stared at Blake for a long moment. "Officer, do you have any idea who you've been questioning for the past hour?" Blake looked at Robert Washington, who was watching the exchange with a calm but sad expression. "A club member named Robert Washington, ma'am." Kelly shook her head slowly. "Robert Washington isn't just a club member, officer. Robert Washington owns this golf course." The words hit Blake like a physical blow. For a moment he couldn't process what Kelly had just said. The crowd around them went completely silent, as if everyone was holding their breath. "I'm sorry, what?" Blake managed to say. "Robert Washington is the owner of Willowbrook Country Club," Kelly repeated, speaking clearly and slowly. "He has owned this property for the past 15 years. Blake looked at Robert Washington with new eyes. The elderly man who had been so patient, so polite, so understanding throughout this entire ordeal wasn't just a member of the country club. He was the owner. The silence stretched on for what felt like forever. Blake could hear his own heartbeat in his ears. He could feel the eyes of everyone in the crowd watching him, waiting to see what he would say or do next. Officer Johnson stepped closer to Blake. "Did you know about this?" he whispered. Blake shook his head, unable to speak. Charles, the man, who had first come to Robert's defense, stepped forward. "Kelly's right. Robert bought this place when it was about to go bankrupt back in 2010. He invested millions of dollars to restore it and make it what it is today." Dorothy nodded enthusiastically. "He saved this club. If it wasn't for Robert, this place would have been turned into a shopping mall years ago." The young man named Tommy spoke up from the back of the crowd. "Mr. Washington employs over 100 people here. He's helped dozens of kids from the community learn to play golf for free." Blake felt like the ground was disappearing beneath his feet. Every word from the crowd made him realize how badly he had misunderstood the situation. He had spent the last hour treating the owner of the golf course like a criminal. Kelly continued, her voice getting stronger. "Robert Washington is not just the owner of this club. He's one of the most respected businessmen in this community. He's donated millions to local charities. He's put dozens of kids through college with scholarships." Blake looked at Robert Washington, who was still standing quietly by his golf bag. The old man's expression hadn't changed much throughout this revelation. He didn't look angry or vindictive. He just looked tired and sad. "Mr. Washington," Blake said, his voice barely above a whisper. I didn't know." Robert nodded slowly. "I know you didn't, Officer Rodriguez, but that's part of the problem, isn't it?" Blake didn't understand what Robert meant, but before he could ask, Kelly was speaking again. "Officer, when someone called to report Mr. Washington as suspicious, what exactly did they tell you?" Blake thought back to the original call. "They said an elderly black male was walking around the golf course and didn't belong there." And what made them think he didn't belong here? Kelly pressed. Blake felt his face getting hot again. He was starting to understand what Robert had meant earlier when he asked if Blake would have questioned a white man in the same situation. The crowd was getting restless again. People were shaking their heads and talking among themselves. Blake could hear fragments of conversations about calling lawyers and news stations. Officer Williams, who had been quiet throughout most of this, finally spoke up. "Rodriguez, I think we need to wrap this up and clear out." Blake nodded, but he felt like he owed Robert Washington something more than just walking away. "Mr. Washington," Blake said, stepping closer to the elderly man, "I want to apologize. I was just trying to do my job, but I realize now that I handled this badly." Robert looked at Blake for a long moment. "Officer, I don't think you're a bad person, but I think this situation shows us all that we have some things to think about and learn from." Kelly was already on her phone, probably calling someone about the incident. The crowd was starting to disperse, but Blake could see that many people were still recording and taking pictures. As Blake and his fellow officers walked back to their patrol cars, he couldn't shake the feeling that this morning was going to change everything, not just for him, but for everyone involved. Robert Washington was finally free to play his quiet round of golf, but Blake suspected that the quiet part of everyone's morning was over for good. As the police cars drove away from Willowbrook Country Club, Robert Washington finally had the golf course to himself again. But the peaceful morning he had planned was now a distant memory. He stood by his golf bag, looking out at the perfectly manicured fairway, and let out a long, slow breath. Kelly Patterson walked over to him, her face still flushed with anger and embarrassment. "Robert, I cannot begin to tell you how sorry I am about what just happened. This is completely unacceptable, and I promise you we're going to do something about it." Robert picked up his driver and tested his grip. "Kelly, this isn't your fault. You and your staff had nothing to do with this." "But it happened on our property," Kelly insisted. "It happened to you, and that makes it our responsibility too." The small crowd of club members who had witnessed everything was still standing around, talking quietly among themselves. Many of them looked shaken by what they had seen. Charles walked over to Robert and Kelly. "Robert, that was completely wrong what just happened to you," Charles said. "I've been coming to this club for 20 years and I've never seen anything like that." Robert nodded thoughtfully. "Charles, can I ask you something? In all those 20 years, have you ever seen a police officer question any other member about whether they belonged here?" Charles was quiet for a moment, thinking. "No, I haven't." "That's what I thought," Robert said quietly. By noon that day, videos of the incident were already spreading on social media. Someone had posted a video on Facebook with the caption, "Elderly black man harassed by police at golf club. Turns out he owns the place." Within hours, it had been shared thousands of times. Tommy, the young man who had defended Robert earlier, had posted his own video on Instagram. His post read, "This is Mr. Washington, who owns our golf club and has helped so many people in our community. What happened to him today was wrong and we all need to do better." The local news station picked up the story by evening. Reporter Lisa Chen stood outside Willowbrook Country Club for the 6 o'clock news. "Good evening, I'm Lisa Chen reporting from Willowbrook Country Club, where this morning an incident occurred that has sparked conversation throughout our community. Robert Washington, the owner of this prestigious golf course, was detained and questioned by police after someone called to report him as suspicious. The caller apparently thought Mr. Washington didn't belong on his own property." The story included interviews with several club members who had witnessed the incident. Dorothy, still wearing her pink golf outfit, spoke to the camera with obvious emotion. "Robert Washington is one of the finest men I know. He saved this club when it was going to close down. He's helped so many families in this community. What happened to him today was shameful, and it never should have happened." The police department was quick to respond to the growing media attention. Chief of Police Michael Torres held a press conference that evening. "We are aware of the incident that occurred this morning at Willowbrook Country Club," Chief Torres said. "We are conducting a full investigation into the matter. We take all complaints seriously, both from citizens who call us and from citizens who feel they have been treated unfairly." But Robert Washington had his own ideas about how to handle the situation. That evening, he called Kelly Patterson at EO. Home. Kelly, I've been thinking about what happened today, Robert said. I don't want this to just blow over and be forgotten. What do you mean? Kelly asked. I mean, I think we have an opportunity here. An opportunity to turn something bad into something good. The next morning, Robert Washington called the police station and asked to speak with Officer Rodriguez. Blake was surprised to get the call, and even more surprised by what Robert had to say. Officer Rodriguez, I wanted to thank you for your apology yesterday, Robert said. I could tell you realized that things didn't go the way they should have. Blake was confused. Mr. Washington, I don't understand. You're thanking me? I'm calling because I think we can learn from what happened. I don't want you to lose your job or get in serious trouble. But I do think there's something we can do together to make sure this kind of thing doesn't happen to other people. Robert's proposal was simple but powerful. He wanted to work with the police department to create a program that would help officers understand the community better. Not just training about racial bias, but actual meetings between police officers and community members. Officer Rodriguez, would you be willing to come to the golf club next week? Not for an investigation, but as my guest, I'd like you to meet some of the people who come here. I think it might help you understand why yesterday was so painful for so many of us. Blake was quiet for a long moment. Mr. Washington, after what I put you through, you're inviting me to your golf club? I am, Robert said firmly. Because I believe that most people, including most police officers, are good people who want to do the right thing. Sometimes we just need to understand each other better. Chief Torres was initially resistant to Robert's proposal, but the media attention and community pressure made it clear that the department needed to do something. Within a week, Chief Torres and Robert Washington were meeting to discuss a new community outreach program. Mr. Washington, Chief Torres said during their meeting, I have to ask, why are you doing this? You could file a lawsuit. You could demand that Officer Rodriguez be fired. Instead, you're trying to help us. Robert smiled. Chief, I'm 72 years old. I've seen a lot of change in my lifetime, most of it for the better. But change doesn't happen when people stay angry at each other. Change happens when people decide to work together. The program they developed was called Community Connections. Once a month, police officers would meet with community members in informal settings, not just at the golf club, but at community centers, churches, and local businesses. The goal was simple: help people see each other as human beings, not as stereotypes or threats. Officer Rodriguez was the first to volunteer for the program. His first meeting was at Willowbrook Country Club, where Robert Washington introduced him to dozens of club members and employees. Blake learned that Tommy, the young man who had defended Robert, was studying criminal justice and wanted to become a police officer himself. Mr. Washington inspired me, Tommy told Blake. The way he handled what happened to him with such grace, that's the kind of person I want to be. The incident also sparked changes at the golf club itself. Kelly Patterson worked with Robert to create a diversity and inclusion committee. They started a scholarship program to help kids from underserved communities learn to play golf, and they began hosting community events that were open to everyone. 6 months later, the story had a very different ending than anyone could have expected. Officer Rodriguez and Robert Washington had become friends. Blake often stopped by the golf club to check in with Robert and to participate in the community connections meetings. You know, Robert told Blake during one of their conversations, that morning when you questioned me, I was angry. But I was also sad because I knew that you saw me as a threat instead of as a person. Blake nodded. I've learned a lot since then. Not just about racial bias, but about taking the time to really see people for who they are. The incident at Willowbrook Country Club became a case study for police departments across the country. Not because of what went wrong, but because of what went right afterward. It showed that even when people make mistakes, even when situations seem hopeless, there's always an opportunity for understanding, growth, and positive change. Robert Washington still plays golf every Tuesday morning. But now, Sometimes he's joined by Officer Rodriguez, who turned out to be a pretty good golfer himself. And on those mornings they talk about how far they've both come since that difficult day when they first met.